My name is Ann Speak. I've been a fundraiser for 30 years in international development and social justice issues. I'm an independent consultant. I was invited to this conference today to talk about the lessons learned in fundraising, trying to attract the public's attention for emergency and humanitarian needs. I took a case study of an NGO in Canada that has existed for many years and had a high reputation when it came to donating. Their reputation was damaged slightly in the mid-90s when a former employee went to the newspaper to disclose an abuse of spending. It was an interesting problem. Well, it was a difficult problem, of course, for all fundraisers, and particularly the international development agencies. The organization was investigated and found to be with no responsibility. Everything was fine. The organization sued the journalist and won. However, the resounding message that the Canadian public got was that they needed to ask questions about their donations. So we ended up with a more informed donor. The organization in question did the absolute best thing they could do, was to hire the best communication possible team. The team taught them some key messages. They phoned their donors, starting from the most generous right down, talked about the issue very honestly. They owned the problem, and they put out some reports indicating how the money had been spent over the years. For a couple of years, their fundraising results suffered, but in the end, they rebounded. And the next time there was a big crisis, their donors responded very generously. Care Canada in the 1980s was the go-to charity for humanitarian work. When the big crisis hit in Ethiopia, when Bob Geldof did his big concert, the average Canadian who was going to send a donation sent it to Care Canada. And I think the fundraising department did maybe something in the national newspaper, but basically all they had to do was show up to work, answer the phone, and open an envelope, and they made money. So there was absolutely no sport in that. No sport. However, they raised a lot of money. They were able to do a lot. Now, the Canadian government has strict regulations about what a charity does with money that they receive in donations. And that is that you have to spend a certain percentage of the amount raised per year, so that you're not getting into a situation where a not-for-profit becomes a for-profit. You see what I mean? So Care Canada was obliged to spend a certain percentage of a huge amount of money every year for a program that they weren't necessarily ready to spend money on. Nevertheless, I have great respect for Care, and I'm sure that they made good decisions. But I didn't work there at the time. I worked for a competing international organization, so I can only see it from a distance. If we can fast forward about 10 years, there was an employee at Care Canada who was upset. He left that organization. I don't know if he was fired. I don't know if he resigned. I don't know the circumstances. However, he was very angry, and he went to a Canadian National Broadcasting Corporation, talked to a journalist about his story, and he basically accused Care Canada of fraud, and that the Canadian public had been duped into donating. Well, this got the attention of the national press. Everybody was concerned about it, including me, who fundraised for a different international agency. The next day, after this story broke, the executive director of Care was in the parking lot going to his car, and a journalist put a microphone in his face and started asking him questions to which he didn't have any answers. He appeared to be evasive on the night news, the national news. And I'd just like to say, the journalists were doing their job here. Okay, this is not, this is anyone's fault, but the public relations followed from this, and the lesson from the fundraiser were deep and very important. The first thing they did, to their credit, was to hire the best communication team they could, which is not something that international development agencies usually do. That's usually the first place where we cut our funds. And they got their message together very quickly, their key messages. They got on the phone to their donors, starting with the mid to major gift donors. They worked their way down the scale. This is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And they put together a really clear report on how they'd spent the money over the years, outlining what they planned on doing with it, the challenges and their successes. And they were very, very honest about this. So I, as a fundraiser at Huko, was going to meet with major gift donors in their homes, and they were also donating to CARE Canada. And they showed me these reports, and they talked to me about how impressed they were with what happened, how CARE was handling it. And I was impressed too. I thought that was a really good lesson for me, that we need to be accountable for what we do. The interesting thing is that CARE Canada suffered for their donations that year, and in fact many international organizations suffered. Canadians were very upset by the potential of fraud. As it turns out, CARE, after the investigation was cleared of all wrongdoing, that was one story, you know, at the back of the newspaper, not the first story on the national news. Then CARE Canada sued the journalist and they won. And that again was on the back page, which, as it should be. I mean, compared to other things that are going on in the world, these were not important issues. Now, fast forward again. Maybe about 10 years later, I'm working for a consulting firm, and I was handling the direct mail program for CARE Canada. We had to do an audit on their fundraising to see what happened over the years. And we saw that not only within 2 years of this crisis had CARE Canada recovered, they had actually increased with the number of major gift donors and the number of donors. And I'm sure it's because they took the lesson of accountability to heart.